In today's video, you will discover the most likely real-life historical person who inspired the character, Mrs. Chamberlain. It took some digging, but I finally found several resources that suggest that Mrs. Chamberlain's real-life inspiration for the character is based on Arabella Huntington. Let's start with a brief recap of what the show has revealed about Mrs. Chamberlain so far. In an early episode, Mrs. Chamberlain, or Sylvia Chamberlain, is introduced to us as a social outcast in high society when she first meets Marion. Marion is told that being seen with Mrs. Chamberlain in public, let alone speaking to her, is frowned upon. According to her HBO character description, Mrs. Chamberlain is a master in creative art and a renowned art collector, despite her standing, or lack thereof, in society. In Episode 4, Gilded Age fans discover a little more about Mrs. Chamberlain, who was revealed to have been Mr. Chamberlain's mistress and lived with him and his wife until the first Mrs. C died. Somewhere along the line, Sylvia had become pregnant when Mr. Chamberlain was still married, and he was good enough to welcome the child out of wedlock into his home while Sylvia was living there. Under what circumstances, we do not know. Following the death of Mr. Chamberlain's first wife, he marries Sylvia and tries to pass the boy off as his adopted son to supposedly escape embarrassment. When asked about the son, Mrs. Chamberlain said he no longer lives in New York and lives in Chicago instead. Now, let's take a look at the life of Arabella Huntington. Arabella's early years are a bit of a mystery. She must have wanted it that way because before she died, she had most of her personal papers destroyed. Arabella Duval Yarrington was most likely born in Richmond, Virginia, circa 1850 to Richard and Catherine Yarrington. There is no birth certificate, and she had always been evasive about her age. In 1850, her parents migrated from Alabama to Richmond, where her father worked as a machinist until he died in 1859. After his death, Arabella's mother managed a boarding house on Main Street along the James River to support her 5 children. It wasn't the most desirable neighborhood in town, and these were the years of the Civil War. The city of Richmond grew in population, and it became a tough place to live, so we might guess that Arabella learned early on how to make the most of what she had. And what she had was a statuesque beauty. One account that I read claims that Arabella's mother was shrewd and knew the value of her daughter's beauty. The family was poor, so the only road for advancement was through sex and intrigue. The boarding house that Arabella grew up in was nearby to a gambling establishment, and it is said that the wealthy industrialist, Collis P. Huntington, was an intrepid card player as well as a shrewd and ruthless businessman, had a wife named Elizabeth who, by all accounts, was plain and childless and living quietly in a mansion on New York's Park Avenue while Mr. Huntington made frequent business trips to Richmond. It is unclear exactly how their paths first crossed, but what we do know is that Arabella, age 19, married John Worsham, age 45, in 1869, and they immediately moved to New York City. Arabella's mother and siblings followed the newlyweds to New York, and Arabella's son Archer Milton Worsham was born the following year. According to some accounts, John Worsham died that same year, while other stories imply that he already had a wife in Richmond, to whom he quickly returned. According to Arabella's son Archer, she met the wealthy railroad magnate while he was staying at the Yarrington boarding home, and he took her to New York to assist him care for his ailing wife. They fell in love, produced a child, and Archer's birth was legitimized through the Worsham marriage. The son Archer insists that his birth father was the wealthy Collis Huntington, but it has never been fully substantiated as true, though Arabella's appeal for assistance from Collis while she was pregnant does seem to hold up in the research. He not only supported her, but also moved Arabella, her newborn son, and her family into nicer living accommodations. According to Shelley Bennett, author of The Art of Wealth, the Huntingtons in the Gilded Age, Arabella, under her mother's shrewd guidance, and with Huntington's money, began to buy and sell houses in the bursting city of New York. It was even reported that she purchased a property which was later sold to John D. Rockefeller, garnering a tidy sum in the transaction. Collis himself was from a poor and somewhat destitute background, and most likely was able to empathize with the plight of Arabella's family before he came along, and it does appear that he must have been fully devoted to the young beauty. Huntington, in an effort to bring himself up in society, began to seriously collect works of art. Arabella followed suit, studying French and gathering her own collection of highly valued artwork. Before long, she became an expert in both real estate and high culture. Not that it did her much good. Even after Huntington married her when his wife died in 1884, Arabella was not accepted into New York high society. Rumors and gossip suggest that Huntington masterminded the sham marriage to get Arabella established discreetly near him in New York. And people always wondered whether little Archer Worsham was actually the railroad magnate's illegitimate son. These questions and insinuations were never answered, and Arabella spent a lifetime making sure they never would be. The most the world would know was that Huntington legally adopted Archer after they were married. He was 14 years old by that time, and that Arabella and Archer inherited his full estate. She is said to have inherited more than $50 million. At this point, it must surely seem likely that Mrs. Chamberlain in the Gilded Age TV show is the fictional counterpart to Arabella Huntington. Please be sure to let me know what you think about this comparison in the comments below this video. Collis Huntington died in 1900, and by that time, one of the most mysterious women in the world had become its richest. And it was not without further scandal that Arabella's real-life story continues. During the course of her relationship and marriage to Collis, Arabella became friends with her husband's nephew, Henry Edwards Huntington. They were closer in age than the married pair, and Henry worked closely alongside his uncle in his business. He also shared an interest in European art, as did Arabella. And Edward, as he was called, always had been sweet on his uncle's beautiful wife. It also turns out that he inherited 1/3 of his uncle's estate. Arabella had a friendly connection with Henry Edwards Huntington's family during her marriage to Collis, but by 1908, the women in Henry's family had developed an intense dislike for Arabella. Henry met with Arabella and Archer frequently as his uncle's trustee to discuss and handle the inheritance they shared. Their encounters were pleasant and soon spawned suspicions of a romance, which Arabella and Henry flatly denied as long as they could. A few years later, Henry's daughter-in-law Leslie wrote to his daughter Elizabeth that father was madly in love with Aunt Belle. In March 1906, Henry's wife Mary filed for divorce, claiming desertion. A few months later, Henry followed Arabella to Europe, where he and Arabella, both in their 60s, were married at the American Chapel in Paris in July 1913. They remained married till her death on September 16, 1924. She is buried at the Huntington Library's mausoleum in San Marino, California, where Henry had built a legacy for himself prior to their marriage. Henry Huntington was buried 3 years later, next to the woman he had loved for so much of his life. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos on the many fabulous, fierce, and feisty women in history.